Welcome back, my friends. Today's video is different than my other videos. Today, instead of discovering haunted places, I will share some horror stories with you. But before we start, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Right now, only 30% of people watching our videos are subscribed, and your subscription will really help us keep creating more of these horror videos for you. Thank you so much for your support, and now sit back and relax and enjoy the video if you dare. My name is Leah, and I never suspected I'd be recounting to a story like this. I encountered something I actually can't make sense of, something that made an enduring imprint on me on the off chance that occurred in 2018 during my Uncle John's wake in an unassuming community. Close to Austin, Texas, Uncle John was a regarded man locally continuously able to help anybody in need as unexpected passing from a fender. Bender was a staggering blow he was getting back from a gathering when the accident happened. In spite of the specialist's earnest attempts, there was no way to save him. I recall the declaration of his demise, filling the environment with bitterness. Yet there was something different, something implicit. A feeling of disquiet had settled over everybody even before the peculiar occasions started. The wake was held in my grandma's home, a huge old home with high roofs and long corridors. The heaviness of many years appeared to be inserted in its walls. The lounge where the casket was set was loaded up with candles and blossoms brought by companions and neighbors offering their appreciation. I showed up before the expected time with my folks to assist with setting everything up. However, distress burdened us. I was unable to shake the inclination that something was behind closed doors. Appeared to be weighty, such that words couldn't exactly catch. As night fell and more individuals showed up, the anxiety just developed further. The mumbles of petitions to God mixed with the stream of old wooden seats. As individuals moved in their seats, everything appeared to be commonplace of a wake, until late a chilling sound pierced the quiet. It was a long, sad wail, dissimilar to anything I'd heard. It appeared to come from someplace close by. It was anything but a typical cry. There was something profoundly disrupting about it. The room went quiet as everybody traded anxious looks. A portion of the more youthful men went outside to research, while I remained nearby, my mom trusting that somebody will make sense of the commotion. Yet they found nothing. Nobody in the nursery, by the entryway, or in the roads. Yet the moaning returned stronger this time, like it was coming from inside the house. Neighbors started to mumble among themselves. One old lady, a companion of my grandma, shouted out, her voice shudder with conviction. "It's the sobbing lady." Her words sent a shudder down my spine. I excused it from the start, thinking she was simply attempting to scare us with old legends I'd heard growing up. Yet as the night wore on, strange things began happening. The candles encompassing the casket started to douse themselves individually, despite the fact that there was no draft. My mom and I had a go at relighting them. Yet when we did, the blazes flashed out again, as though something concealed would not allow them to remain lit. The anxiety transformed into dread, and petitions to God developed stronger and more frantic. Nobody thought for even a second to gaze straight toward the final resting place. Then the most unnerving snapshot of the night happened. A lady praying close to the casket let out a shout and staggered in reverse. Everybody moved in the direction of the final resting place, and what we saw froze. A set up the new fragrant blossoms encompassing the final resting place were curly roasted dark. Their lovely smell had been supplanted by the harsh odor of something copied. Nobody could make sense of it. The house was brimming with individuals. It was basically impossible that anybody might have done this without being seen. A few visitors proposed eliminating the casket from the house, yet others demanded that we continue to ask and show no trepidation. The old neighbor talked again, her tone presently grave. She made sense of that. The sobbing lady, otherwise called Lorona, was said to wander looking for her lost kids, yet that she could likewise show up close to the dead, as though attempting to take them with her. When you hear her cries, it implies she's taking somebody with her. She cautioned. Her words left us in paralyzed quiet. The remainder of the night was a strained haze. Nobody considered venturing outside again. The request went on until sunrise, yet the severe air never lifted. Individuals revealed hearing strides outside or seeing shadows crossing the deck, yet nobody was sufficiently bold to explore. When morning at last came, we took the final resting place to the graveyard to cover my uncle. The sunshine brought some alleviation, yet I was unable to shake the recollections of what had occurred after the entombment. Numerous who went to the wake would not examine it. Some credited it to fatigue or aggregate creative mind. Yet I knew better to consume blossoms, the smothered candles, and the howling absolutely no part of that could be excused with such ease, since that evening I've at no point ever remained at my grandma's home. In the future, the memory of that wake torment me still, particularly the picture of the darkened blossoms and that wail. I frequently think about my Uncle John contemplating whether he at any point genuinely discovered a sense of reconciliation, or then again on the off chance that something upset him during his last goodbye. There are minutes in life that vibe straight out of a night bad dream occurrences when reality vacillates, leaving you with additional questions and answers. I go by Julian, and what I'm going to share occurred throughout the late spring of 2015 at the burial service of an old family companion in Indiana. However, years have passed, everything about striking in my memory like it happened just yesterday. The departed was Mr. Stephen, a dear companion of my dad since their childhood. He was an unassuming and legit repairman, all around cherished. Locally, his demise came unexpectedly, a coronary episode that allowed him no opportunity to bid farewell. My dad demanded we go to the memorial service to help the family. I didn't realize them well, yet it seemed like the okay thing to do. Much to my dismay, this choice would lead me to encounter something I actually attempted to fathom. The burial service home was situated on a tranquil road fixed with tall oak trees hung in Spanish, and the harsh summer intensity of the south blurred. As we ventured inside, the air inside was unnaturally cool, like the cooling had been wrenched up to the greatest. The spot was little, with white walls and worn wooden seats. At the far end, Mr. Stephen, casket rested, encompassed by blossoms, while a gathering of grievers supplicated delicately. Everything appeared to be typical, until I seen something awkward close to the final resting place. A young lady in a blue dress was playing alone. She appeared to be around 6 or 7 years of age, with straight dim hair integrated with 2 plaits. What grabbed my eye wasn't simply her presence, yet her light-hearted disposition, which distinctly diverged from the grave general vibe. She was throwing a little fabric ball high up and getting it over and over, neglectful of everybody around her. Dress decorated with fragile white ribbon appeared to have a place with one more period, as though she had gotten out of a rare photo. At first I figured she may be a general, a granddaughter or niece of Mr. Stephen, yet something about her felt odd. No other person appeared to see her. In any event, when the ball moved to the feet of a lady sitting close by, the lady didn't respond. Maybe the young lady didn't exist, doing whatever it takes not to harp on it. I sat on one of the seats and brought down my look, zeroing in on the request. Yet every couple of seconds, I felt a sense of urgency to glance back at her. It was like something profound inside me demanded I focus on her. She kept playing, throwing the ball out of sight in a perpetual circle. At one point, an old lady, a neighbor of the family, deciding by how she addressed my dad, sat close to him and started murmuring. Her words froze me. Set up. Did you know a young lady kicked a bucket outside this burial service home a long time back? She was hit by a truck while going across the road. They say she was wearing a blue dress. My dad didn't answer yet. I felt the air in the room develop heavier. The lady continued to talk, as though uninformed about the heaviness of her words. Some of the time individuals say they've seen her around here, yet their stories, right, I was unable to take my eyes off the young lady. Might it at some point be her, a phantom? I had to go at persuading myself it was only an occurrence, a kid somebody had brought to the burial service, and nothing more. Except for the more I watched, the harder it became to disregard the peculiarity of the circumstance. The young lady played constantly. She didn't change her demeanor or communicate with anybody. At one point, the ball moved close to the final resting place, and she followed it as she twisted down to get it. She momentarily gazed straight toward me. Briefly our eyes met, and time appeared to stop. Her look wasn't that of a kid. There was a void in her eyes, something that didn't have a place. The request finished, and the family arranged to take the final resting place to the burial ground. As the group moved, I took the risk to request one from Mr. Stephen's nieces on the off chance that she knew the young lady. Was she looked confounded and shook her head. What young lady? She asked. I highlighted where I'd last seen her. Yet she was gone. I looked through the room, checking behind the seats, and close to the entry. In any event, strolling down the burial service home's passages, the young lady had disappeared. No other person appeared to have seen her. When I referenced it to my dad, he dismissed it, saying she was possible a relative who'd previously left. Yet Where it counts, I realized that wasn't correct. The memorial service parade left for the graveyard, and I followed. However, my psyche was somewhere else. I was unable to quit contemplating the young lady, her blue dress, and the story the neighbor had told. Everything felt too unusual to be in any way a happenstance. That evening back at home, I attempted to rest, yet couldn't. Each time I shut my eyes, I saw her figure unendingly throwing the ball caught in a circle. The following day, interest got the better of me, and I started posing inquiries. Gradually, I sorted out the story. Years sooner, a young lady named Camila had passed on external to burial service home. She was the girl of a lady who worked there as a cleaner. The mishap happened when Camila ran into the road, pursuing a ball. Not seeing the truck coming toward her, she kicked the bucket. In a flash, the blue dress she'd been wearing that day turned into a detail everybody in the area recalled. From that point forward, reports had flowed about her phantom showing up at the memorial service home. Some professed to have seen her playing close to the final resting place is generally in a similar dress with a similar ball. Others excuse it as a legend, a story to frighten inquisitive passers-by. Yet I understood what I'd seen right up till now. I don't know precisely exact thing occurred during that memorial service. Yet every time I consider Camila, her blue dress, and that eerie look, I can't shake the inclination that she's actually caught there for reasons unknown, despite the fact that I've at no point ever seen her in the future. There are evenings when I swear I hear the delicate crash of a fabric ball skipping someplace in my subconscious. There are minutes in life that stay with you perpetually, pictures and sentiments so profoundly scratched into your memory that regardless of how long passes, they stay as striking as the day they happen. This is one of those minutes. My name is Thomas, and this story happens in 2011 when I was 22 years of age, residing in an unassuming community in North Colorado. It was a tranquil spot with dusty streets and a broad sky that could maintain eye contact with you for quite a long time. I never thought something like this could occur in such a standard town, let alone to me. Everything started with the demise of Dustin, my dearest companion. He wasn't a companion. He resembled a sibling. We grew up together, shared mysteries, giggled until our stomachs hurt, and made arrangements we'd never get to satisfy. His passing appeared suddenly, an auto collision on an abandoned thruway. They said he let completely go and hit a tree. There were no observers. The destruction of his vehicle and the broke bits of our lives at his burial service. The coffin was shut. His mom didn't believe anybody should see him like that, and I saw it. It caused all that to feel stunning, as though he wasn't exactly inside. It seemed like Dustin was still, who knows, were standing by to return the assistance. Was straightforward, as things frequently are in modest communities. Family, dear companions, and a couple of neighbors assembled in the unobtrusive church to bid farewell. The air was weighty with the fragrance of incense and the low mumble of petitions. I approached the coffin to say my last farewell. As I put my hand on the finish, with an odd strain chose my chest, as though the air around the coffin was different, heavier. I pulled away rapidly, thinking it was only my feelings overpowering me. Yet, as I ventured back, I saw others appear to be awkward too. Some cleaned their hands on their garments, others scoured their necks, as though dismissing something undetectable. The disquiet waited all through the assistance. It was anything but a run-of-the-mill memorial service. Individuals appeared to be tense, their eyes dashing around the room as though anticipating that something should happen. When the function finished, everybody left as fast as they could. Nobody waited to think back or give extra sympathies, not even Dustin's dearest friends. I returned home, inclination void, attempting to fail to remember the odd load of the day. That evening was when everything transformed. From the second I strolled into my home, something fell behind closed doors, appeared to be thick, nearly STI, and I attempted to divert myself by sitting in front of the television, flipping through stations carelessly, yet nothing could hold my consideration. Ultimately, I switched off the TV and hit the hay, depleted genuinely as well as sincerely. Rest came rapidly. I don't have any idea how long I'd been snoozing when a commotion shocked me conscious. It was a low murmur, consistent and faint, like an electronic gadget. Languid, I sat up and looked toward the parlor. That is the point at which I saw the pale blue sparkle of the TV, despite the fact that I was sure I switched it off. My most memorable idea was that I probably neglected, yet as I strolled into the space to switch it off, what I saw on the screen made me freeze. It was anything but a show or a business. It was a dim, shadowy figure remaining against a dark foundation. The figure didn't move, yet there was a natural thing about its shape, its stance, I realized it was Dustin. My body responded before my psyche could get up to speed. I staggered in reverse, unfit to tear my eyes away. It couldn't be him. And yet I realized it was all aspects of me remembered him, despite the fact that there was no face, no highlights. Simply the diagram of his structure. Unexpectedly, the screen went dark. The house was dove into quietness for a couple of moments before the TV walked out on by it itself. This time there was just static. The cruel clamor occupied the room, yet I was unable to move. When I at last accumulated the boldness, I turned off the television from the wall, guaranteeing it couldn't turn on again. That evening I didn't rest. I sat on my bed gazing at the entryway, trusting that the sun will rise. The following morning, I checked my telephone and saw a voice message from an obscure number. My hand shuddered. As I played, it was nothing except for static, a similar sound I'd heard from the television. I had a go at erasing it, yet every time I did, it returned in my inbox after a few bombed endeavors. I surrendered, overpowered by a developing sense that this wasn't something I could make sense of. Throughout the next days, other bizarre things happened. Dustin's old guitar, which I had put away for its situation, showed up on the lounge floor one morning, impeccably tuned, as though somebody had played it on another event. I found an old tape we recorded as children sitting right in front of me. However, I hadn't seen it in years. These little yet purposeful signs made it difficult to disregard what was occurring. In the end, I chose to visit Dustin's mom. She seemed worse for wear, her face fixed with misery and restless evenings. When I educated her concerning what I'd been encountering, her demeanor transformed. She said she'd felt his presence. Also protested her home would continue on their own. His photographs would tumble off the walls without reason. It was clear I was in good company in this for quite a long time. These events proceeded with, then similarly as abruptly as they began, they halted. The television, as of now not turned on. Without anyone else, the voice message vanished. The sign stopped. Maybe Dustin enjoyed at long last, found harmony right up to the present day. I can't completely make sense of what occurred yet. When I consider Dustin now, I don't feel dread. Rather, I feel a significant bitterness. Maybe a few securities are solid to the point that not even demise can cut off the man. Keeping in mind that I won't ever know why he connected, I might want to accept it was his approach to bidding farewell. A little more than 7 days prior, I went to one of the weirdest and most startling funerals of my life. I've never been odd, and I've generally viewed myself as somebody with the 2 feet solidly on the ground. However, what I encountered that evening in a humble community close to Waka significantly had an impact on the manner in which I see things everlastingly. Everything began with the death of Andrew, also known as Andy a Man, notable locally for his benevolent nature and long captivating discussions in the town square. He passed on unexpectedly of a coronary episode. Despite the fact that Andy was moderately youthful, nobody questioned the doctor's diagnosis. The wake was held at his sister Sarah's home, a run-of-the-mill adobe home with a wide patio lit by faint yellow bulbs. Plastic seats were organized all around, and individuals showed up unobtrusively, embracing the family prior to tracking down a seat to ask or share tales about Andy. The air was weighty with despondency as well. As with something different I couldn't exactly put, it was like the actual air conveyed a bizarre weight radiating straightforwardly from the open casket put in the focal point of the room. I took a gander at Andrew's body in the casket. From the beginning he appeared to be tranquil, even quiet. Yet the more I looked, the more odd it felt. His face was unbending, expect for somebody perished, yet there was something disrupting about how his lips were firmly squeezed, as though keeping down a mysterious eye. Attempted to shake off the inclination, persuading myself it was only the flashing candlelight pulling pranks at the forefront of my thoughts. I joined the others in petition, trusting the routine would quiet me. Yet around 2 a.m. something happened that I will always remember. At that point, the greater part of the grievers were either falling asleep in their seats or murmuring unobtrusively among themselves. I was remaining close to the casket, absently gazing at the blossoms encompassing Andy's body, when I saw somebody approach. It was Don Anello, an elderly man from the town known for his peculiar stories and reclusive nature. He rearranged forward, leisurely resting on his stick, and twisted down to draw nearer, take a gander at Andy. At first, I didn't respect it. However, at that point, I saw Don Anello unexpectedly curl, almost falling over the blossoms. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. He guided a shutter hand to the casket and stammered. His hand moved, his words pierced the quietness. Freezing everybody in the room at first, individuals excused him, expecting it was the weakness or his unusual nature. Apprehensive giggling undulated through the group. Yet I was unable to shake the disquiet that settled over me. Without acknowledging it, I wound up venturing nearer to the casket, my heart beating. As I inclined in to see with my own eyes, Andy's hands were gotten over his chest similarly as they had been previously, yet something about their position appeared to be changed. I was unable to make sense of it, yet it felt like they weren't exactly where they'd been before. Murmurs started to echo through the group. Some drew closer mindfully to investigate themselves, while others remained back, gripping rosaries and murmuring rush petitions. Somebody proposed it very well, maybe a posthumous reflex, an uncommon regular development brought about by the body's muscles. Contracting, yet one more voice called attention to that Andy had been dead for north of 24 hours, making such a clarification far-fetched. As the mumbles developed stronger, the flashing candles around the casket started to douse the mythical people individually. The room became hazier with each snuff fire. Then the elevated lights diminished, creating long shaded areas that moved across the walls. Briefly, the room was dove into close to add up to obscurity. An odd smell consumed the space, like sodden earth blended in with something foul and rotted. When the light balanced out, everybody turned their consideration back to the casket. Andy's hands were not generally gotten over his chest. One of them currently hung flaccidly to the side, as though it had descended. The aggregate wheeze of the room was trailed by a flood of frenzy. Some shouted, while others scrambled for the entryways. Sarah, Andy's sister, blacked out into the arms of a neighbor, and a few group needed to convey her external. I remained frozen, completely still, unfit to move. My eyes were locked on Andy's hand, attempting to support what I was seeing. Perhaps it was a quake, a shift brought about by the development in the room, yet the casket had been still, and the house had not an obvious explanation to shake. Donanello stayed close by, his face pale, and his lips shaking as he mumbled something I was unable to hear. Out of nowhere, the casket's cover started to close. It didn't close, yet rather moved gradually, like being pushed from inside. The delicate river of wood reverberated in the now quiet room, drawing everybody's frightened look. When the top at last fell shut with a dull crash, the sound was stunning. Nobody needed to remain after that. The wake finished suddenly, and Andy was buried the next morning without further ceremony. Since that night, I've tried to make sense of what I witnessed, but the memories only grow more vivid with time. Some in the town have written it off as a mass hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. Others believe Andy had unfinished business in life, and that his spirit wasn't ready to leave. I don't know what to think. All I know is that every time I close my eyes, I see the moment his hand shifted, breaking the stillness that should have been absolute. That image haunts me, and no matter how much time passes, I know I'll never be able to forget it. Have you at any point felt that something that appeared as though a coincidence wasn't one at all? I am Carl, and I'm a performer. I play in a little mariachi band in a town close to Ohio. What I'm going to share is something that neither I nor my bandmates will at any point neglect. Yet I wouldn't recount this story if not for the way that sometimes I remember maybe it had simply happened. That evening began like some other. We got a call. Before, in the early evening, it was a man requesting to enlist us for a song. His voice was that of a more seasoned, honorable man, firm, courteous, and clear. He gave us a location on the edges of town and determined the tunes he believed us should play. I recollect that he mentioned Cross of Distraction and A Modest Bunch of Earth. They were serious melodies, however normal enough that they raised no cautions. Wear your best suits and bring your best instruments. He said it's an exceptional event. As night fell, we got together our instruments and set off toward the location. The street was dull and lightened exclusively by the headlights of our old van. The bearings drove us to a maturing house encompassed by an enormous yard and a couple of wilted palm trees. From outside, the faint gleam of the house lights flashed faintly, and the primary thing that struck us was the tranquility. It was excessively grave for a melody. When we showed up at the entryway, we got out and started unloading our instruments. A man arose to meet us. His demeanor was one of disarray, as though he had no clue about why we were there. Great night. I welcomed him, attempting to sound proficient. We were recruited to play out a melody. This is the right location, isn't it? His face changed from disarray to mistrust a song. He mumbled, looking back toward the house. We're holding conscious here. For Sir Thomas, the name hit me like a virus wind. Conscious. For the one who had employed us at first, I thought it was a slip-up. Maybe we entirely misunderstood, gotten the location. Yet, when I referenced The name of the individual who had called us the man's response made the hair on my arm stand on end. His eyes enlarged, and he stammered, "Sir Thomas, are you certain that is the name you were given?" I gestured, and a mumble spread among individuals accumulated in the yard. At last, a lady, who I later learned was daughter of deceased, moved toward us. Her voice shuddered as she requested that I tell the one who had called he was a more seasoned, refined man. I said he talked obviously with areas of strength, for he referenced he wore a cap and had a flawlessly managed white mustache. As I completed, her face turned pale. "That is my dad," she said, her voice breaking. "Yet he passed on yesterday." The air developed weighty. With a ghostly quietness, my bandmates, as a rule cynics, looked uncomfortable. One of them murmured that we ought to leave promptly, yet the family begged us to remain. Evidently the melodies I'd referenced were Sir Thomas's top picks, ones he had consistently said he needed played at his wake. Whether out of regard, interest, or dread, we chose to remain and perform. After all, we were at that point there, and the circumstance felt excessively dreamlike. To leave, we followed them into the house, where the casket rested in the focal point of the lounge, encompassed by glinting candles. Seeing Sir Thomas's face in the open casket sent a chill through me. He matched the portrayal. I had quite recently given a similar white mustache, a similar cap. Lying close to him, we started to play the main mentioned tune, Cross of Carelessness. From the absolute first note, the climate in the room moved, the temperature decreased discernibly, and the candles started to glimmer unpredictably. Not a single one of us really considered taking a gander at one another, every one of us attempting to smother our developing disquiet. When we completed the principal tune, a portion of the grievers sobbed quietly, yet nobody talked. We went on with A Small Bunch of Earth, the second melody on the rundown. As we arrived at the ensemble, I felt an extraordinary sensation, as though somebody was gazing at me. When I looked up, everybody's eyes were fixed on the casket. My heart beat in my chest, yet I continued playing, attempting to concentrate. The last melody was You're Leaving, My Heavenly Messenger. As we played the last song, one of the candles tumbled to the ground, snuffing itself out. The quiet it left behind was stunning. There had been no breeze, no development to make it fall. Nobody said a word except for the unease in the room was overwhelming. We completed the tune rapidly, and the girl that departed expressed gratitude toward us in a shudder voice. They paid us, however, we hadn't requested anything, and we got together and left as fast as we might. The ride at any point home hushed up. Not a solitary one of us needed to discuss what had happened, each lost in our own considerations. The following day, I chose to check the call sign on my telephone. I needed to affirm the call I had gotten to check, whether it was some unusual misstep or a mind flight. Yet there was nothing, no record of any call from that number. Maybe it had never occurred from that evening on. We at absolutely no point ever talked about the episode in the future. Each time I play Cross of Distraction or A Modest Bunch of Earth, I feel an odd anxiety, as though I'm back in that house with the final resting place before me. Perhaps it was where Vincent's approach to guaranteeing his last desire was satisfied, or maybe there are only a few things in this world that we're not intended to comprehend. There are occasions that time can eradicate events that weight locally's memory like a permanent scar. I am Clara, and what I'm going to relate occurred in 2019 in an unassuming community close Wanaka. It's a spot I prefer not to name on the grounds that since that evening individuals there abstained from discussing what happened, like referencing it could bring back the repulsions they're attempting to fail to remember. I was an untouchable and alumni understudy in human studies, directing examination on farriery customs. I never envisioned my hands on work would lead me to observe something so unnerving. Everything started with the death of the Mendoza family, a dad, mother, two small kids, and a grandma who resided with them. They were undeniably seen as dead in their home under conditions nobody needed to depict exhaustively. The couple of individuals sufficiently bold to talk about it murmured of a custom one, including peculiar images drawn on the walls and dark candles copied down to their wicks. The police researched yet found nothing. The main thing certain was that it was anything but a burglary or a mishap. Whoever had done this acted with accuracy and cold estimation. Bits of gossip spread rapidly through the town. Some guaranteed the Mendozas had been associated with dim works on bringing the misfortune upon themselves. Others demanded it was crafted by a religion performing customs in the close-by mountains. As per the town seniors, such cliques had existed for quite a long time, concealed in Waka's most remote corners, sometimes asserting lives for their dim functions at First, I excuse these accounts as nearby fables misrepresented stories from an eccentric local area, yet what occurred next constrained me to re-examine all that the memorial service was held 2 days after the bodies were found, since the family had no direct relations in the town. The whole local area met up to coordinate the occasion. It was one of the most odd and disrupting services I've at any point seen. The assistance occurred in the town's little old church, its adobe walls and wooden roof. Oozing a shocking immortality, 5 final resting places were arranged in the middle, encompassed by blossoms and candles. At first, everything appeared to continue typically. The neighbors supplicated unobtrusively, some sobbed, and the minister played out the gifts. Then they showed up, a gathering dressed totally in dark, entered the congregation. They weren't from the town, nobody remembered them. They moved quietly, not gathering anybody's eyes, and shaped a circle around the final resting places. They conveyed dark candles, which they lit individually, permitting the warm wax to trickle onto the floor like it were essential for a custom. Nobody halted them. Maybe it was dread, or maybe it was the sheer disarray existing apart from everything else except the town. Society let them continue. They stood unmoving until the cleric completed the assistance. When the time had come to take the final resting places to the burial ground, the dark-clad outsiders followed the parade. They said only their presence was severe, like the actual air had thickened around them at the burial ground. They put their candles around the newly dug graves. When the final resting places were brought down, they stood still, observing eagerly as the earth covered the caskets. One of the more seasoned ladies from the town, remaining close to me, murmured something I will always remember. They've come for them. As night fell, the graveyard became quiet, and everybody got back to their homes, yet I was unable to shake the anxiety I felt. The picture of those outsiders and their dark candles tormented me soon thereafter. While I was surveying my notes at the little motel where I was remaining the innkeeper, a man in his 50s, let me know something that chilled me deep down. He said that similar events had occurred elsewhere in Waka, unexplained deaths, followed by funerals where unknown people appeared with black candles. In every case, the graves were found desecrated the very night of the burial. At first, I thought he was exaggerating, trying to scare me with local legends, but I couldn't ignore the connection. Around 3 a.m., a strange sound woke me, a distant murmur, like chanting mixed with the rustling of the wind. I got up and looked out the window. The streets were empty, but the sound persisted, coming from the direction of the cemetery. Something told me to stay put, that it wasn't safe to investigate, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the cemetery. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was that the black candles were still burning. Their flames flickered unnaturally high, untouched by the wind. As I moved closer to the graves, I realized something was wrong. The earth covering the coffins had been disturbed. Shining my flashlight over the graves, my worst fears were confirmed. All 5 coffins were gone. Paralyzed with fear, I didn't have the foggiest idea what to do. That is the point at which I saw them at the furthest edge of the graveyard. Figures moved among the shadows. There were 5. There are a few things nobody ought to observe, occasions that break how you might interpret reality and perpetually impact the manner in which you see the world. I am Harry, and this occurred in 1988. When I was 19 years of age, I resided with my family on a remote farm near Houston, encompassed by slopes and back roads that appeared to turn into dead end. The region was scantily populated, yet anecdotes about witches' spirits and dim packs voyaged immediately passed down as alerts to keep away from the obscure. I never thought one about those accounts would contact my life so straightforwardly. Everything started with the death of Mrs. Fiona, a lady everybody around knew, yet nobody genuinely comprehended. She resided alone in a little lodge at the foundation of a slope, encompassed by dark chickens and spices that nobody could distinguish. Individuals murmured that she rehearsed black magic, that she could see the future and recuperate bizarre diseases, yet additionally revile anybody who crossed her. She minded her own business, yet the reports were copious. Some said she had made a pack of her influence and abundance. Others swore they had seen her meandering the slopes around evening time, joined by shadows that weren't human. When she kicked the bucket, the entire town knew in a split second, not on the grounds that anybody declared it, but since the canines yelled the entire night, as though they had detected her takeoff before any other person. The news came the following morning. She had been Found dormant in her bed, her face frozen, in fear her hands gripping her chest. There were no indications of sickness, except for her girl who had come from the city to organize the burial service, guaranteed her mom, had cautioned her that her death would be uncommon to wake, was coordinated rapidly. Like everybody needed it over quickly. My mom, a dedicated lady, demanded that we go to it's our obligation as neighbors she expressed. So as night fell, we advanced toward Mrs. Fiona's lodge. The lodge, generally a foreboding sight, was currently enlightened by many candles brought by the participants, yet regardless of the number were lit, they continued onward out individually, as though the actual air would not allow the light to remain. Individuals showed up, some out of regard, others out of sheer interest. The air inside the lodge was smothering. There was an unusual smell, a blend of shrinking blossoms and something metallic like dried blood. The casket sang in the focal point of the room. Encompassed by a little gathering presenting petitions to heaven in quieted tones, I drew nearer to draw nearer, take a gander at the body. Yet something halted me. Maybe it was sense, yet I remained in the corner, seeing from a distance. Outside, the canines kept woofing their cries, developing stronger. As the night continued, unexpectedly a sharp thump reverberated through the lodge. Everybody froze, gazing at the final resting place. Nobody talked except for the thump came back again, stronger this time. It appeared to come from inside the casket. Mrs. Fiona's girl, a young lady who had been quiet all night, started to wail wildly. She stood suddenly, ran out of the lodge, and vanished into the night. Some attempted to follow her, yet she was gone before they could contact her. Inside, the strain developed deplorable. Somebody recommended opening the casket, yet others, frightened, demanded that it was an ill-conceived notion before any choice could be made. Something significantly stranger happened. The final resting place started to move, not brutally, yet enough to clarify that something inside was moving. The candles that were as yet lit stifled at the same time, diving the room into haziness. Frenzy emitted. Certain individuals shouted, while others surged external. I was frozen, completely still, unfit to move, my eyes locked on the casket as it kept on shaking. When somebody at long last figured out how to light a light, the room was faintly enlightened again. The final resting place had tipped over, lying on its side. Nobody actually considered moving toward it. Then Mrs. Fiona's girl returned. She was holding a group enveloped by red fabric. Without a word, she put it on top of the final resting place and started to talk in a shudder of voice. What she said stunned everybody. She admitted that her mom had told her before she passed on that she had made a peace with something extraordinary in return for a really long time of well-being and power. She had guaranteed her spirit upon her death, yet in her last days, Mrs. Fiona had attempted to break the settlement, and her death had been a long way from serene. The girl made sense of that the group contained the devices of her mom's art, special necklaces, old coins, and a book of ceremonies. Without a second thought, she conveyed the pack outside, passed on, and tossed it into a huge fire. She had set one up by one. She threw the things into the flares. As she did, the canines' crying became stronger, as though they were being tortured by something undetectable. When the last thing hit the fire, a sharp, piercing shout reverberated through the air. It was not normal for any sound I'd heard, neither human nor animal. The blazes of the huge fire quenched in a flash, abandoning just quiet. The following day, Mrs. Fiona was covered in the town graveyard. The unease during the entombment was intense, yet nobody said a lot. Of her little girl left town that very evening and was gone forever. The lodge was deserted, and over the long haul, it turned into the subject of prohibited stories. Certain individuals professed to see odd lights glimmering close to the lodge around evening time. Others swore they heard the yapping of canines, despite the fact that none resided close by. Right up till now, I try not to talk about what I saw that evening. I couldn't say whether it was something my brain couldn't understand, or then again assuming that I really saw something otherworldly. Yet every time I elapse by that slope, I feel a snugness in my chest, like a person or thing is advising me that there are powers in this world we're not intended to upset. Have you ever felt that something or someone doesn't quite belong? I'm not talking about losing an object or forgetting something important. I mean that unsettling feeling, as if the world isn't functioning the way it should, as if a boundary has been crossed that was never meant to be. My name is Liam, and I'm from Arizona. Everything that I'm going to say to you happened when I was 23 years of age, and regardless of the amount I attempt to cover the memory, it generally returns like a voice calling From a dim corner of my psyche, everything began at the memorial service of Sandy, a dear friend from school. She had died in a car accident on her way home from a party. Everyone said it was a tragedy, a moment of carelessness that ended in her untimely death. When I heard the news, I felt disbelief and sorrow, as though my brain couldn't process how someone so full of life could suddenly be gone. I was unable to miss her funeral, so I put on a dark suit and advanced toward the notable Oakland graveyard, a spot known for old graves, and the tales encompassed them. The help was held in one of the burial ground's most seasoned churches, a little faintly lit room with wooden seats and candles in each corner, creating glinting shaded areas on the walls. I showed up later than expected and slipped into a seat at the back, doing whatever it takes not to upset the serious air. From that point, I could see everybody assembled, their countenances weighty with pain. The air was thick with the heaviness of misfortune, and the mumbles of petitions to God mixed with a periodic river of the seats. It was then that I saw her, a woman sitting alone in the first column, only a couple of feet from Sandy's open casket. She looked old, likely in her 70s or 80s, and wore a dark dress that appeared to have a place, with one more period around her neck, was a pearl jewelry impeccably organized. She didn't cry, didn't move, she basically gazed at the casket with a power that caused my hair to stand on end. There was something about her presence that didn't fit. Perhaps it was her outdated attire, or maybe it was the way no other person appeared to recognize her. I found it odd that somebody so particular could slip through the cracks. I hung over to a friend close by and murmured, "Who is that woman?" My companion shrugged, saying he hadn't seen anybody matching my depiction. As the function closed, everybody moved outside for the entombment. I examined the group, searching for the woman once more, yet she was mysteriously gone as the shaft conveyors conveyed Sandy's casket to her grave. I moved back in the direction of the sanctuary, and there she was, remaining in the shadows, her eyes fixed straight forwardly on me. Her gaze was penetrating, startling, and tenacious. I immediately turned away, yet when I looked back minutes after the fact, she was gone. Later, at the gathering held at Sandy's family home, I was unable to shake the picture of the woman. I portrayed her to a couple of individuals, yet nobody knew who she was. Perhaps she was only a far-off family member one recommended. Yet something about that didn't agree with me. At last, Sandy's uncle, a more established man I hadn't addressed before, heard my depiction and moved toward me. His face developed pale. As I talked without saying a word, he took out an old blurred photo from his wallet and gave it to me. The air left my lungs as I gazed at the picture. It was her, a similar woman I had seen at the memorial service. She was wearing the very dark dress and pearl accessory that is my mom, the uncle said unobtrusively, Sandy's grandma. Yet she died a while back. My brain dashed, attempting to sort out the thing I was hearing. It didn't check out. How is it that I could have seen somebody who'd been dead for quite a long time? I attempted to support it. Maybe I had confused her with another person. Yet the picture was clear to me. Mine, it was her. That evening I was unable to rest each time I shut my eyes. I saw her face gazing back at me. Then around midnight, I woke abruptly to a strong, overpowering scent, flowers wilted and sweet, yet cloying like the chapel had smelled during the funeral. I turned on the light, but my room was empty. I searched the entire apartment, but nothing was out of place. The smell lingered for hours, and though I couldn't see anything, I felt as though I wasn't alone. The next morning, determined to understand what was happening, I returned to the cemetery. I didn't know what I hoped to find, but I felt compelled to go. When I arrived at Sandy's grave, I remained peacefully for quite a while, gazing at the newly turned earth. That is the point at which I saw it, a little item lying at the foot of the grave. I got it and froze. It was a pearl accessory indistinguishable from the one the woman had been wearing. I brought the accessory home and set it in a little box where it stays right up to the present day. I don't have the foggiest idea how to manage it. Each time I open the crate, I'm overwhelmed with the memory of her gaze, the heaviness of her presence, and the inclination that she was attempting to convey something I won't ever see. A few ties between the residing and the dead are major areas of strength for to even think about cutting off. And in some cases, the people who have passed tracked down ways of reminding us they are still here. I couldn't say whether I'll at any point discover a genuine sense of reconciliation with what I saw that day, yet I know one thing for specific: the woman with the pearl jewelry hasn't left me completely. In some cases, situations develop before your eyes with such clearness that you want to excuse them as a fantasy of your creative mind, something you could forget. Yet a few things are difficult to unsee. I am Adrian, and I was 27 years of age when this happened. It was the year 2000, and everything occurred in a graveyard on the eastern side of California. During my granddad Bruno's funeral started as a day of distress transformed into an encounter that undeniable everybody present forever. My granddad was a strong-willed man, the kind who lived a simple but hard life full of sacrifices. He had moved from Mexico many years sooner with my grandma and worked vigorously in development until his body could never again get through it. His death left us crushed, yet there was additionally a liberating sensation knowing his long battle with disease had at last finished. His last wish was to be covered in a little unassuming burial ground where he had bought a plot numerous years sooner. We showed up sooner than expected that day, wearing dark conveying blossoms, and feeling the heaviness of sadness, the graveyard hushed up, encompassed by transcending cypress trees that cast long shadows over the graves. It wasn't current or rich, more like a remnant of the past with a quality of immortality. The service started at 10 a.m. A little special raised area had been set up close to the newly dug grave, decorated with a photo of my granddad and a couple of candles. The minister, a more seasoned man with a profound voice, discussed my granddad's life, advising us that his enduring had finished, and he was presently settled. The family assembled around the garment's casket, prepared to say their last farewells. I remained at the back with my cousins, discreetly seeing that as the point at which we saw it behind the cleric among the cypress trees, a figure seemed. It was tall and flimsy, dressed completely in dark. At first, I thought it was a maverick, maybe a close buddy of my granddad's. Nevertheless, something about the figure appeared to be off base. It didn't move, it remained there unmoving, covered in shadows, as though the daylight couldn't arrive at it. I wasn't the one in particular who saw. Gradually, others started to look in similar course, their demeanors moving from disarray to disquiet. Nobody talked except for the unease in the air was intense when the cleric completed his discourse and signed for the casket to be brought down. I thought back toward the trees. The figure was gone. There was no strong of development, no stride, simply a vacant space. Where it had been, I attempted to excuse it as my creative mind. Yet what occurred next eradicated any questions. As the post conveyor stacked the casket into the grave, a chilling sound ended the quietness. It wasn't the sound of wind or anything regular. It was a long, struggled shout, suppressed and misshaped, as though coming from underneath the ground. It was the sound of a person or thing frantically arguing for help. The shout deadened everybody. A few ladies started to cry, and others naturally ventured back. The minister endeavored to stay under control, yet his pale face deceived his trepidation. The sound appeared to radiate straightforwardly from the actual grave. However, it made no sense. The shaft carriers froze, dropping the ropes, and leaving the casket shifted dubiously on the edge of the grave. My uncle, my granddad's oldest child, was quick to break the loss of motion. He yelled for the casket to be lifted out. Promptly, it was anything but an idea. It was an order. In the midst of the disorder, a couple of men summoned the boldness to maneuver the casket back onto strong ground. Nobody could talk. We as a whole recently gazed, trusting that somebody will assume responsibility for the circumstance. Then one of my cousins, known for his dauntlessness, chose to open the casket. His thinking was that there could have been a slip-up, that maybe my granddad hadn't passed after all. Ridiculous as it sounded, it was the main clarification anybody could stick to. While the casket was opened, what we saw will torment me until the end of my life. My granddad's body was there, yet it wasn't the way we had left it. His hands, which had been conveniently gotten over his chest, were curly raised, the fingers unbending and curved, as though he had been tearing it within. The top of his face, painstakingly ready by the undertakers, was currently distorted in a veil of unadulterated dread, like he had seen something sickening in his last minutes. The minister started recounting supplications resoundingly, while some relatives cried wildly or dismissed unfit to bear the sight. I stood frozen, gazing at the unimaginable scene, my brain dashing for response. To one of the burial ground laborers attempted to quiet the group, offering a logical clarification. He recommended the gases from the disintegrating body could have caused the development, yet nobody accepted him. We as a whole understood what we had heard. That shout wasn't something a dormant body could deliver after a long tense. Second, the cleric favored the casket once more, and the shaft conveyors, noticeably shaken, shut it again. This time nobody said a word. As they brought down it into the grave, the air was thick with dread, and the standard serious farewells were supplanted with a frantic craving to leave as fast as conceivable. When the last modest bunch of soil covered the casket, the shout halted the severe. Climate eased up somewhat, yet the fear waited an hour. Souls, not a single one of us talked about it. Subsequently, even now, I haven't gotten back to that graveyard some of the time when I'm separated from everyone else. I think about the figure we saw that day, the shout, and the appearance on my granddad's face. I don't have the foggiest idea what genuinely happened, yet one thing is sure, it was anything. But in error, there are things in this world we don't comprehend, things that don't have a place in. I've never been one to accept effectively in the paranormal. My life has been genuinely customary, without any trace of phantom stories or unexplainable occasions, yet what befell me as of late at the funeral of a dear companion has made an imprint I can't eradicate. I am Jason, and this is the tale of how a goodbye transformed into a frightful memory that follows me right up. Till now, it was a quiet Sunday evening when I got the call that froze me in my tracks. Dane, one of my dearest friends since. Youth had passed on in a car accident. He was just 28 years of age, with his long and promising life to look forward to. The news hit me with a crushing weight. At first, I didn't completely accept that it is chuckling his jokes are common recollections. Everything felt strange, as though his non-attendance could never be truly. Yet soon the affirmation came, and there was no denying that the funeral was held that very evening at his family's home. I showed up at 8 p.m. sharp from the second I ventured. Inside, the climate felt severe, like something undetectable was pushing down on everybody. The house was loaded with family companions, and neighbors' discussions were quieted, and the tranquil murmur of petitions to God consumed the space. Dane's coffin was put in the focal point of the lounge, encompassed by white flowers. The cover was left open, so the people who wished could say their farewells. It took me some time to assemble the boldness to approach. When I at long last did, my legs felt weighty. With each step peering down at him, I attempted to zero in on the way that he appeared settled. His face was peaceful, as though he were dozing, yet something felt off. Perhaps it was the pallor of his skin or the firmness of his hands collapsed over his chest. Anything it was, it made me profoundly uncomfortable. I immediately ventured back and bound a seat against the wall at the furthest finish of the room. From that point, I had a reasonable perspective on the coffin. At first, all that appeared to be typical. However, the room was weighty with sadness. Then little odd things started to happen. The candles encompassing Dane's body began to gleam more than expected, like battling against a non-existent breeze. I let myself know it was only the regular way of behaving of fire. However, at that point, the elevated lights started to act peculiarly. They flashed sporadically, diving the room into brief snapshots of all-out haziness prior to returning on each time the lights went out. I saw something that made my heart race. A shadow. It was tall, a lot taller than anybody in the room, and it remained close to the coffin. It didn't move or make a sound, yet its presence was obvious. When the lights returned, it would disappear, leaving me doubting my mental soundness. At first, I thought my brain was pulling pranks on me, a consequence of weariness and despondency, yet every time the lights glinted, the shadow returned nearer to the coffin than before. At one point, it appeared to hang over Dane's body, as though noticing him or murmuring something. I needed to express something to caution somebody, yet dread established me. Set up, the air developed weighty, and an odd smell started to occupy the room, a blend of shriveled blossoms and clammy earth. The request became stronger, as though the myrrhs were attempting to muffle something concealed. Then the lights went out totally. The room was dove into outright obscurity. In that stifling quietness, I felt a presence, weighty and choking out. I don't have the foggiest idea how long it endured, yet when the lights at last returned on, everything had changed. Daniel's coffin was, as of now, not similarly situated. The top was marginally aslant, as though somebody had attempted to close it, yet halted. Mostly the blossoms encompassing it were dispersed across the floor, and a couple of the candles had been pushed over. The most disrupting subtlety, anyway, was Dane's. My hands, previous they had been perfectly collapsed over his chest, now one hand balanced flexibly past the brink of the coffin, like he had moved. The room emitted in wisp murmurs and wheezes. Certain individuals started supplicating all the more intensely, while others sit back in dread. My eyes were locked on Dane's hand, unfit to turn away. It was unthinkable, yet it was directly before me. Then I saw something different, a dim, soggy blemish on the floor close to the coffin. It was long and unpredictable, like something had hauled itself from the casket toward the focal point of the room. Seeing it sent a chill down my spine. I needed to hurry to take off from the house and never think back, yet my body would not move. The air felt thick, practically suffocating, and I could detect something watching me. However, I was unable to see it. Ultimately, the family chose to close the coffin for good. The minister played out another gift, his voice shaking as he presented the request. The casket was fixed, and the help finished not long after everybody left, rapidly keeping away from eye-to-eye connection. Like recognizing what had happened would make it genuine. For the following couple of evenings, I was tormented by bad dreams and my fantasies. Daniel remained before me, his face pale and bland, his eyes fixed on mine. He didn't talk, yet his presence felt weighty, like he were attempting to let me know something I was unable to see. Even now, I can't make sense of what I saw that evening. Maybe it was my distress appearing in manners I had zero control over, or perhaps it was a far thing outside my ability to comprehend. Yet one thing I realized without a doubt, that shadow wasn't a fantasy of my creative mind. It was genuine, and it waits in my recollections, similarly as distinctive as the day it occurred. From that point forward, I've kept away from funerals, scared of what I could see. Yet every time I shut my eyes, I actually see that shadow, quiet, unmoving, and watching. I might very well never completely comprehend what occurred, yet it has made an imprint on me that I'll carry for eternity.